And it would be because he's the most real, consistent, true person I've ever met in my life.
Ich bin auch so müde.
3, 2, 1, Mama und Lothar. Herzlich willkommen zur nächsten Folge Making the Case. Diesmal Tim Duncan. Ja, let's fucking go.
The size of the court
Dieser
and lack
Intro
of
schon,
pads
ne?
or helmets
Ja.
give fans the most intimate experience of a team sport that exists.
Lack
Because
of
the different
helmets.
styles that basketball allows for, players develop their own distinct identities and signature styles through their creativity, flair, and
Hat er
athleticism.
ihn das gemacht?
And although no player succeeds alone, the scoring volume and two-way nature of the sport give individual stars a nearly unprecedented amount of control over the flow and outcome of a game.
Da war
For this
Russell noch
reason,
gut.
players are constantly
Ja.
compared to their peers and to the legends of the past in order to
Gutes
answer the
Bolt
most
einfach
hotly
läuft, seitdem er weg
contested
ist, ne?
question in the sport. Who's the greatest to
quasi
ever
alles.
do it? For many, the question is redundant. They believe in only one right answer, their answer. Others might have their own personal stance, but acknowledge one or two alternatives. But I believe that there's much more nuance to the question of greatness and more answers to it than you might think. By my count, there are 8 players in NBA history that have a substantial claim as the GOAT. It's a subjective thing though. I can't give you a definitive answer. All I can do is make the argument. So today, I'll be making the case for Tim Duncan as the greatest basketball player of all time.
Der Kerl war auch sehr special.
Ja. Aber halt sehr langweilig.
I know what you're thinking. No way.
Nett.
There's no chance Tim Duncan is the GOAT. He's not even the best player of his generation, you might say. You're thinking there's no way Tim Duncan belongs in the same company as some of the other players that I'll talk about in this series.
Nur Jacke, Alter.
Sehr fancy. Wie viele Tiere willst
And
du
if you
sterben
believe
sehen?
that, there's
Ja.
probably 3 things you'll bring up as I make this argument. Number 1, his second act. If you're the kind of person who rates players through spreadsheets, his career in the 2010s is statistically underwhelming. Number 2, his peak. You might say that Duncan never had a real peak where he was the most dominant player in the league night in and night out like Shaq was. And number 3, Greg Popovich. Duncan has always had Pop, arguably the greatest coach of all time, in his corner. I hear
will
you,
ja bald
and I
retiren, ne?
promise to address those throughout this video.
Also, Pop ist auch, glaube ich, nicht der Coach, der nochmal ein Rebuilding schafft.
Mit
Ich glaub,
seinen
der hat-
77 zarten Jahren oder was das war, ist das halt auch.
Ich glaube, der hat da einfach die Nerven nicht mehr zu. Wenn du von David Robinson zu Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, weißt du, diese 20 Jahre, ich glaube, der hat einfach keinen Bock mehr. Ich glaube, da hat er die
Kenn ich
Nerven
auch
auch
nicht.
einfach nicht für zu.
Größtes Verständnis für.
Video as they become relevant. For now, let's do what we do with every other basketball player when we talk about them historically and look at Duncan's numbers. Here are the notable accolades from his NBA career. His 5 championships are more than Larry Bird or Wilt Chamberlain. His 15 all-defensive selections are the most of anybody ever. His 15 All-Star appearances are tied for 3rd all-time. He has as many regular season MVPs as Kobe and Shaq combined, and only Michael Jordan has more Finals MVPs. Don't forget about his college accomplishments though, because remember, Duncan came out of Wake Forest after 4 years, despite people like Jerry West who said he could have been the #1 overall pick had he left after his sophomore year. Instead, by the end of his collegiate career, he was a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, 2-time ACC Player of the Year, 2-time Consensus All-American, and was the National Player of the Year his senior season. And by the time he heard his name called on draft night, he was college basketball's all-time leader in rebounds.
College Basketball habe ich halt so die Stats nicht drauf.
Ich auch
Das ist
überhaupt
so-
nicht.
Aber beachtlich,
Ja.
scheinbar.
Ball career should be enough to have him at the table of the GOAT conversation. You're not totally sold though. We need more numbers. To look at his career
We
further,
need
we
more
should examine
numbers.
his place on some of the all-time leaderboards. Here's where he ranks all-time in some of the major statistical
Wow.
categories. There's some impressive stuff here, but for the most part, it doesn't really jump off the page at you. His career totals are
rebounds, krass.
substantially less impressive than other players at his position, like Kevin Garnett, Karl Malone, or Dirk Nowitzki. And that's because you can't judge Tim Duncan's numbers like you can with most players. Imagine, in 15 years, if somebody said to you that Russell Westbrook was better than Steph Curry, citing how many points, assists, and rebounds Westbrook had. You'd laugh, right? because you know that numbers don't always tell the full story. Yeah, Steph Curry has impressive numbers, but Westbrook's are unbelievable. It would be impossible and irresponsible of me to talk about these players without mentioning the data that exists with them. But by measuring players purely by their basketball reference page, you're leaving out the context and the story in which those numbers were achieved.
Es ist
That
halt ein
context is
Teamsport.
what makes those
Yeah.
numbers meaningful, and it's what makes basketball worth following. Such is the case with Tim Duncan, whose success and greatness transcend a box score. You can't judge Tim Duncan with numbers alone. The fact of the matter is that if you ran a team and you could pick from any NBA player to ever play the game, and your goal was to set your team up for success, you would pick Tim Duncan. For one, you have his play on the court, and we are going to talk about some numbers here for a little while. Offensively, he was dominant through the first 10 years of his career. From 98 to 08, he averaged 21.6 points, 11.8 rebounds, and 3.1 assists, while playing on one of the slowest teams in the
Solide.
league. In that span, his teams never once ranked in the top half of the league for pace. If you adjust his stats for pace and look at his numbers per 100 possessions, you're looking at a big man who was every bit as productive as any other offensive player in the league at the time. You already know about his skill set.
31-17.
He was, after all, the
Job
big
well done.
fundamental.
Ja.
He could pass out of double teams, face up and break down the defense with surprising agility, consistently knock down shots from the elbows, and torch any big man in the league with his array of moves in the post and subtly imposing physicality. He could masterfully run a pick and roll with any guard with working limbs, and of course, he had his signature bank shot, one of the most consistent and reliable shots of all time, along with Kareem's skyhook and Dirk's fadeaway. Those skills never deteriorated throughout his career, save perhaps his final year. And that's where I want to tackle the idea that his second act was unexceptional. His scoring numbers dipped in his last 8 years, where he never averaged over 20 points per game again. But
Okay.
as the Spurs offense became more collaborative and free-flowing, Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili shouldered more of that scoring burden as Duncan aged. His shot attempts fell,
So
though
soll es
he
ja auch sein
remained
am Ende
efficient.
des Tages.
His skills hadn't waned, the Spurs just didn't need him to score 28 points every night. He retained his role of alpha dog and contributed in other facets of the game. He could
Smoother
pick his
Übergang
spots,
von der einen
put
zur
his
anderen
teammates in position
Generation.
to succeed,
Ja.
and save himself undue punishment and wear until it was needed.
Das ist ja das, was viele nicht hinkriegen. Wenn die
Ja.
der Top-Dog sind die ganze Zeit und dann einfach, dass es dann heißt, nee, Bruder, brauchen wir nicht mehr. So, mach das und dann ist okay. Da brechen halt viele dran.
Ja.
Das ist halt
Schau
einfach
dir die
so.
Rockets an. Ne? Also, das
Ja.
ist halt auch so ein Exempel für die eine Maschine ist weg und es
Ja.
ist halt einfach dead.
Nichts mehr.
Basically.
That's why, in 2013, at the age of 36, he became the oldest player ever named to first team All-NBA. Duncan
Cool.
was never a prolific scorer, even in his prime. His game was never predicated on gaudy point totals like Malone or Dirk. With a different offense, he took fewer shots. With fewer shots, he scored fewer points. The whole time, though, he remained the whole package. He was a tremendous rebounder, the go-to guy in crunch time, and don't forget, the best defender, maybe ever. And that's what hurt his stats more than anything. The lack of flashy numbers for defense outside of blocks and steals. It's so hard to measure how much a drive was cut off because of his presence, or a shot that
Halt
was
ein Spiel, wo es
altered
um
because of
Punkte
his
geht, ja.
contention. There are some advanced metrics that attempt to do this, and although it's an inexact science, stats like defensive
Ooh.
rating, defensive win shares, and plus-minus numbers do an admirable job of capturing the game's best ball stoppers. Duncan's place in those metrics is unmatched. These metrics
Defensive Rating, dritter. Defensive Win-Shares, zweiter. Die Defensive Plus minus fünfter. Ja, er ist halt, ne?
Aber wirklich alles Top 10 und
Ja.
sogar 2 von 3 in hier Top 3.
along with his 15 defensive selections, serve as a testament to how Duncan thrived when the opponent had the ball. Legendary basketball writer Jack McCallum wrote for SI after Duncan's retirement, Duncan guarded centers and power forwards, sometimes even small forwards, with equal success. And as the NBA became more and more of a high pick-and-roll game, Duncan accepted the extra responsibility of getting involved at the perimeter while never abandoning basket responsibility. Nobody was better than Duncan at being both an advanced guard and the final fortress. Nate Silver's 538, a website that works with data and statistical analysis in every realm from politics to sports, published this article by Neil Payne. In it, Payne collects several data points on offensive and defensive prowess in order to come up with a player's WAR value, or wins above replacement. In other
Wins
words,
above
how much better
replacement,
were you
okay.
than an average player? Payne's WAR valued balance above
Digga, wer sich diese ganzen Statistiken ausdenkt, ne, wie Win over Replacement. The fuck.
Ja, ich höre es auch zum ersten Mal, das soll ich sagen.
Ja,
Aber auch
bei Jimmy Highroller haben wir das schon 1-2 Mal gehört, aber es ist halt wirklich, wie kommen die darauf? Ja, wir nehmen jetzt den Stat, dann nehmen wir den Stat und den Stat, rechnen das mal 4, geteilt durch 65, weil 65 ist eine schöne Zahl, und dann machen wir dasselbe mit irgendeinem random Dude, und dann gucken wir mal, wie gut er ist. So, weißt du, so stelle ich mir das vor. Ey, wirklich Statistik.
Players who succeeded at both ends of the floor. Tim Duncan was the
guck
leader
mal.
by a mile.
Der einzige dreistellig bei Harmonic Mean.
It means that Tim
Man
Duncan was
weiß.
a tremendous offensive player despite the lack of volume and one of, if not the, greatest defenders of all time. In short, his value as a two-way player is virtually unmatched in the last 50 years of NBA basketball.
Ja,
All right, so enough with the numbers
schon
for
was
right
wert.
now. I want to talk about Tim Duncan when it mattered the most, the playoffs. And I want to use this time to dispute the idea that he doesn't belong in this conversation because he never had a transcendent peak. You can look at any numbers, read any article, talk to any fan who paid attention to the game at the time, and you'll come to the same conclusion. Tim Duncan was a killer in the playoffs. Nearly all of his most memorable performances came in the postseason, and more often than not, came in crucial games when his team needed him most. From his near quadruple-double in 2003 to close out the Nets and earn his second championship, to his 25-point first half against the Heat in Game 6 of the 2013
Ooh.
Finals 10 years later, there was
That's
never a
Heat.
moment too big for Duncan. Here
Ja.
are some of his playoff rankings, significantly higher in almost every category than he
Rest
is in
in
the regular
blocks.
season.
krass.
His 99 championship run was phenomenal, where he tore through a young Kevin Garnett, the newly assembled Kobe Shaq Lakers, Rasheed Wallace's Trailblazers, and the Patrick Ewing
Oh.
Knicks on his way to
So
being
süß.
named the second youngest Finals MVP ever. His 2002 campaign was incredibly underrated, as he carried one of the worst teams of his career to 60 wins and outplayed Shaq before being beaten by the two-time champs. His 2003 season was his best season, and we'll talk more about it in a second. Just know that his running mate, David Robinson, averaged 8.5 points and 8 rebounds in the regular season, and that Duncan's win shares in that playoff run remain the most of anybody in a single postseason. In the mid to late 2000s, Duncan's Spurs remained a fixture in the playoffs, against competition like Dirk's Mavs, Nash's Suns, and Kobe's Lakers. He repaid them with 2 more titles in 05 and 07. He also gave us
Stark.
one of the clutch shots of his career in Game 1 against the Suns in 2008 with this.
Over him. O'Neal with the help. Takes it to the basket. Duncan, a three-pointer. Puts it up. It's good.
War. Ja, brauchst du halt Ex für, ne?
Ja.
Alter, brauchst du da Ex für.
Like I said earlier, in Game 6 of the 2013 Finals, at age 36, playing against Wade, Bosch, and Apex LeBron on the road, Duncan put up 25 points in the first half. It would have gone down as an all-time series-clinching performance had it not been for...
Catches, puts up a three.
Ja.
Won't go. Rebound Bosch. Back out to Allen. His three-pointer.
Ganz, ganz wild.
5 seconds
Oh
Digga,
Mann.
wirklich einfach gebrochen, die Spurs danach. Komplett.
Set the tone in Game 1 with a classic 21-10 game, while shooting 9 of 10 from the field.
Er ist halt auch eine Maschine, der Mann einfach.
2015, trying to defend the title at the ripe age of 38 in Game 7 of a first-round series against the Clippers, Duncan reached all the way back and put
Digga, wer ist denn die Nummer 0 von den Clippers?
up 27.
Der ist im falschen Sport. Ich glaube, der ist Footballspieler gewesen.
Paul delivered this.
Was zum Teufel?
Ist das Blake? Ja.
Das war Blake, ja.
Tim
Er
Duncan
war sicher
gave
gehen.
assist to a 22-year-old Kevin Garnett was the same Tim Duncan that was taking a 26-year-old DeAndre Jordan to school. He was ready to win championships from the day he entered the league to the day he left it. And I think that's why his peak is used against him as an argument here. The fact that his championship window lasted his entire 19-year career and that his teams were always somewhere between 50 and 60 wins meant that it's hard for any one of his seasons to stand out from the rest. And for some unfathomable reason, being
Sind halt die
consistently
fucking
great
Spurs.
is less of an accomplishment
Yeah.
than being great for short stints. Like I said, his 2003 season was his best. After leading his team to 60 wins and his second consecutive MVP, Duncan eviscerated everything in his path as he tore through the playoffs. He upended the Suns, ended the Lakers' 3-year reign as champions, and outdueled Dirk before absolutely torching the Nets in the finals.
ist eine fucking
By the
Leistung.
time he
Ja.
was holding the trophy, it was clear beyond a shadow of a doubt that Duncan was the league's best, most complete player. Here's what the Ringer's Chris Ryan had to say about 2003 Tim Duncan.
We think about the Spurs now as this international house of aesthetically pleasing basketball. They were Terminators back then, and they were squeezing the life out of the game because they were just too good. They were too good. They were military in their precision. They were unflappable. They were dirty, and Duncan was the perfect avatar of all of it. You go back and watch him now. It's unbelievable the physical contact that he's absorbing in these series against New Jersey or whoever else they were playing against. And it was just routine that you'd see him put up 20 and 20s and barely break a sweat, much less a smile.
I'd be lying if I said
I
that
don't
Duncan's
care.
peak was higher than Shaq's. But I also wouldn't feel comfortable saying that the difference between the two is great enough for me to lose sleep over. To
Shaq
me,
verstehe ich
the
noch,
truth
wie
is that
dieser
Shaq was
dicke
so
Junge
much
das
more of a
geschafft hat.
spectacle. To watch peak Shaq was an experience unlike anything else. To see someone of his size and stature move so powerfully
Ja,
and
ist echt
fluidly
so.
is still something of a miracle. To see Duncan at the peak of his powers was a lot like seeing him 7 or 8 years later. He was just a little faster, a bit stronger, and a touch quicker. But do aesthetics denote superiority? I'd say no. And though Shaq in his prime was certainly a more dominant offensive player, there was never a time where he could match Duncan's abilities as a defender, leader, or a teammate. The two are the antithesis of each other. Shaq loves fame. Duncan loathes it. Shaq would sometimes show up to training camp out of shape, often battled with his co-stars, and finished his career having played for 6 different teams. Duncan took great care of his body, cemented himself as the cornerstone of his franchise, and is one of the most celebrated teammates in NBA history. Shaq left a little on the table. You could never say the same about Duncan. Shaq cared a little too much about what everyone thought about him, while Duncan couldn't have cared less.
Ja.
And while
Deswegen
I'm
auch
not
die
addressing the points
Klatschshots.
of criticism, let's go ahead and
Juckt
tackle
mich
Pop.
nicht. Ich will einfach
Pop, to
gewinnen.
me, is the
Für mein
greatest
Team.
coach there ever was. But he would be the first one to tell you that he wouldn't be here without Tim Duncan. For one, Duncan can play any style of basketball, in any era. You want to go old school, slow pace, dump it off to the big man down low, let him bang, and be solid on defense?
Kann er.
Titles. Remove the hand checking and illegal defenses, increase scoring, and start moving toward the perimeter?
Kann er.
Titles. The league goes small ball, the pace explodes, and shooting and ball movement is more important than anything?
Kann er.
The largest margin of victory in NBA Finals history. Second, he can play with any team. Honestly, has any superstar done more with less? Jordan had Pippen his entire run and Rodman for the last half. Bird had McHale and Parrish. Wilt had West and Hal.
Diese Shorts, die machen mich immer noch fertig, ne?
Ja,
Also, das ist ja wirklich bodenlos teilweise.
Greer.
das ist
Russell
eine
had
Sportart.
Cousy, Jones, and Havlicek. Magic had Kareem and vice versa. Kobe had Shaq and vice versa. And LeBron has had Wade, Kyrie, and Anthony Davis. Duncan's best teammates, old David Robinson, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili, combined for 5 third-team All-NBA appearances and 4 second-team appearances during their time with Duncan. Parker and Ginobili are long shots for the Hall of Fame, and even though Robinson's in it, you wouldn't say that he was playing at a Hall of Fame level alongside Duncan. Third and most
stimmt.
importantly, Duncan forged the culture of the Spurs. Pop was essential in acquiring players and reinforcing the culture that Tim wanted, but Duncan was truly the most vital component. The NBA is a star-driven league, and finding a great player who hasn't gotten a coach fired is like finding a good Star Wars movie. They're few and far between.
Ja,
Dieser Schuss ins Herz, aua. Der tat ganz
Aber-
kurz weh.
aber er sitzt.
Es ist absolut richtig. Oh Gott. Also ich meine, die letzten 3 waren absolut bodenlos. Aber da habe ich auch, da könnte, also mal kurz Shoutout, da haben wir auch im Podcast, habe ich kurz drüber gerantet, warum die letzten 3 Teile so schlecht sind.
Disney.
Nee, Kurzfassung, Star Wars Community. Ganz einfach. Die wollten wollten Teil 7 genauso wie Teil 4 haben. Teil 7, wenn du ihn dir anguckst, ist genau wie Teil 4. Komplett. Von vorne bis hinten. Nur, dass der Todesstern ein Planet ist und kein Mond. So.
Also, du meinst, deine Theorie dahinter ist, ohne jetzt zu weit auszudriften, es wurde zu viel auf die Fans gehört und dadurch ist.
Nein. Nein. Pass auf. Die haben das so gemacht, Fans haben gesagt, geil, es ist so wie früher, haben sich den Film angeguckt, haben gesagt, das ist ja genauso wie früher, das ist ja Schmutz. So, dann kam Teil 8, Teil 8 müssen wir nicht drüber reden. Ich weiß nicht, was der Schreiber sich damals gedacht hat, aber so.
Autor von einer Story.
Ja, richtig. Und dann hast du Teil 9, der muss diesen Scherbenhaufen, den Teil 8 hinterlassen hat, wieder zusammenkehren und irgendetwas daraus machen. Und es war halt auch bodenlos schlecht.
I am Skywalker.
Sie hätten, weißt du, was das Schlimme ist? Die machen ja jetzt noch mal 3 neue Filme, wo Rey Skywalker den Jedi-Orden wieder aufbaut. Die hat nicht mal vernünftiges Training gehabt. Wie soll die den Jedi-Orden wieder aufbauen? Guck ich mir nicht an. Ist egal.
Skywalker.
Ja, nee, ist sie nicht.
Mach weiter hier, Basketball.
Ja,
Not only
Schmutz.
did Duncan not get Pop fired, he let Pop coach him harder than any superstar ever. If Tim had ever thought to himself, you know what, I don't feel like getting my chops roasted in front of the whole team today because I didn't box out right in practice, he could have gone right to R.C. Buford and Pop would have been gone. End of story. But Tim understood what Pop was about and trusted him enough to be mentored in an unprecedented way. He set the example for his teammates that no one is immune to criticism and that it's expected of everyone to leave their egos at the door. In 2017, the Spurs SB Nation blog Pounding the Rock spoke to Sam Walker, author of The Captain Class, a book which examines winning culture in sports, from field hockey to rugby. In an exchange, Walker said this: "The book's main conclusion is that the only one factor that must be present in order to maintain greatness over a long period of time is the presence of a particular kind of selfless, relentless, independent-minded, publicity-averse, emotionally composed captain with strong communication skills. And that's Duncan. Duncan was a pure example of the species."
Wow,
I
was
love
ein
Pop,
Ritterschlag.
but I have to believe that Tim Duncan was the catalyst that empowered Pop to be what he is now. This isn't Belichick Brady where you wonder who made who. Pop is the greatest coach of all time because of Tim Duncan. If you want to try to take credit away from Duncan by saying that he played for the best teams, you might be right, but only because he made them the best team. He gave up touches, let other guys hold the torch, put everyone around him in the best position to succeed, and he enjoyed it when they did. When I said earlier that the thing that hurt Duncan's stats more than anything was a lack of defensive numbers, I lied. The thing that hurt Duncan's stats more than anything was the fact that he never gave a shit about stats or awards. Ever. He wanted his teams to succeed and he wanted to win. That's it. Just listen to the way his teammates talk about him. I don't think
Ja, krass. Need to say a thank you. For that friend.
there's a more beloved teammate than Tim Duncan. In the words of NBA Commissioner Adam Silver, his understated selflessness made him the ultimate teammate. He was always the big brother, correcting them when they made mistakes and throwing them
Komm her jetzt!
things didn't go their way. He
Nein,
led
nein,
them in
nein,
the
nein,
most
machen wir
effective
nicht.
way possible, not with subtweeting, bombastic words, or showy halftime speeches, but by example.
Der
Of all
Blick.
the end of career
Ja,
farewell
blinzelt
words,
dieser Mann.
this is the one that stuck out to me the most. From his former teammate, Brent Bones Berry. He quoted Mark Twain saying,
Trouble.
"To be good is noble, but to show others how to be good is nobler and no trouble. For your brilliance, TD, I am grateful. For your skills as a player, I am in awe. And for your friendship, I am honored."
Oh, wie
Milwaukee
schön.
Bucks coach and former Spurs assistant Mike Budenholzer said to ESPN's Kevin Arnovitz, "The magnitude of that, the number of people in this league who have enjoyed opportunity or found fortunate spots in the league, you can trace it all back to this one guy, to the way Timmy played ball and the way he conducted himself. The culture is Timmy."
Wie man
The
ihn Timmy
NBA
nennt,
is a
kann
league of
versteht zwar nicht, aber
superstars and
okay.
dynasties. From Russell to Jordan, from Chamberlain to LeBron, we remember its history through its champions. And in the history of North American sports, no one has been as good for as long as the Spurs. San Antonio's success is completely unprecedented in the world of basketball. Aside from his lockout-shortened sophomore season, Duncan won 50 or more games and qualified for the playoffs in every season of his career. He finished his career
Wow.
with a win percentage of 71%, the highest of anyone, in any sport, ever. The Spurs' run of success started in 1997, the year they drafted Tim Duncan. Since then, he has been the cornerstone, the engine of the franchise that has perpetually defined what winning culture looks like in and outside of basketball. And so I say again, if you ran a team and you could pick any NBA player from any era of basketball and your goal was to win, you would pick Tim Duncan. His abilities as a basketball player are what made him a superstar. But his consistency, willingness to be coached, love and support of his teammates, and humility are the things that make him transcendent. I'll let Pop have the last word. Here he is after Tim Duncan announced his retirement.
You know, everybody always talks about who they like to eat dinner with. You know, if you had one night you could go to dinner or go to lunch with so-and-so, who would you like to do it with? And people say, you know, Mother Teresa and Jesus and the Dalai Lama. And, okay, I get it. And I can honestly tell you, my dinner would be with Timmy.
Wahnsinn.
Ja.
And it would be because he's the most real, consistent, true person I've ever met in my life.
Wow. Das ist ja
Hey
heilige.
everybody, this is Clayton. Thank you so much for watching this video. It took a lot of time and effort to make, and like I said in the video, I hope to make this a series where I make the case for 7 other players as the GOAT, so I hope you consider subscribing. In the meantime, feel free to check out my website.
Dieser Mann ist, warum habe ich ihn nicht abonniert?
Verstehe ich auch nicht. Mach ich auch gleich nochmal.
Bodenlos. In dem Sinne, haut rein, bis zum nächsten Mal, lasst es euch gut gehen. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.